So Keith, why is metaphor important in your work?
To me, the thing that's very important at metaphor is that in order to do our work, we have to communicate. Communication requires language, whether it's spoken or body language or gestures, and everybody has a slightly different way of wording things. But we all know about stories, about images, metaphor for how we do our work, and that metaphor can be a bridge over that communication gap.
Laurel, when do you use metaphor?
I use metaphor in my work when I need to have a difficult conversation with someone. For example, as a manager, I might use metaphor in discussing behaviours with a staff member, and it actually protects personal safety and prevents defaulting to blaming or victimising behaviour.
Laurel, give me an example where metaphor has been really useful for you.
I was actually writing a workshop the other day for Victoria Police, and it was around techniques of protective behaviours. And originally it was a technique that was devised to work with victims of sexual assault. And the whole notion was about talking in third person once removed. So it actually seemed to me that to actually talk in metaphor was a way of not blaming the victim and not actually indulging in victimising behaviour, and actually empowering the victim to tell their story.
Frank, why do you use metaphor?
I tend to use a lot of metaphor in my work because sometimes it's difficult to explain the techniques that we use because they're very experiential. So, for example, I like to describe the thinking that we do, the approaches that we have as moving everyone's thinking back upstream. I use a metaphor of a river, to the source of the river, where it all begins, so that whatever the subsequent downstream outcomes are quite different. Because we tend to spend a lot of our time in our thinking downstream, and we really need to be smarter than that and move it back upstream.
Arthur, why is it important that we use metaphor?
Metaphor is a fantastic way to leverage patterns that are already known. If you're introducing a new concept around something, it's hard to explain all of the detail. But if you can explain something as simple as a metaphor, people can leverage the patterns that are already in their head, and they can get the really complex ideas into something that they're already comfortable with. So it enables you to get the complex messages across in a very, very simple way.
Keith, why is metaphor more important today than ever?
Organisations today are far more complex than they ever have been due to rich interactions between people and complicated processes. Metaphor is a way of cutting through the complexity by using much simpler images that don't lose the richness of what's happening but makes it much easier to understand.
Arthur, when you're working with businesses and organisations, what is it that makes animal metaphor so powerful?
The animal metaphor works really well because everyone understands animals. We grow up with them, you know, we have little farm animals as children, we go to the zoo as a child. So we kind of recognise the animals, and we understand it's not just about the animal by themselves, it's about how the animals mix with each other in the bigger environment. So the metaphor works at multiple levels, at an individual behaviour and at how the behaviours interact with each other. And people get it very quickly, it's intuitive.